A very good morning to you all. It's a great pleasure to see you here this morning and to see so many of you. A number are still trying to get in, but it's great to have so many of you here for a discussion on a very complex subject matter. And I must say, if I may, I welcome the decision of the member states to hold this conference. The relationship between development and intellectual property is one of the most challenging questions in our policy context. And some discussion on that, in particular through these conferences. This is the second that we've held in this area, can only help us in reaching a higher level of understanding, common understanding. It's a challenging subject matter, first of all, because I think development is obviously a very open concept. And of all the various descriptions of what this concept is, I think probably it comes down to basically a common element of improvement in the economic, social and environmental quality of life, and a relative improvement in the economic, social and environmental quality of life, given that we are living in a world of great disparities, and the relative improvement is directed at reducing some of those disparities. Now, such a vast subject matter can't be tackled easily, and we very much welcome the practical approach that is adopted in this conference to this question, namely how to benefit from the intellectual property system. And that reflects, if I may suggest, a policy shift among many of the developing countries away from looking at intellectual property as a matter of mere compliance, and towards looking at intellectual property in a practical manner, how intellectual property can practically assist development and the objectives of various developing countries. It's a very hard question to answer, I think, because I believe that the impact of intellectual property on development is an indirect one. The main impact on development, the direct impact, is through innovation and creative and cultural production. And these, of course, are the reasons for which we have intellectual property. And each of innovation and creative or cultural production really requires quite a complex ecosystem. And the benefits of innovation and cultural creation are extremely well known. In the economic sphere, of course, their benefit as being a source of growth, and also their benefit as being the competitive advantage that enterprises can enjoy. And intellectual property contributes to those policy goals by securing or protecting the competitive advantage that innovation or new cultural or creative production confers on enterprises. It is, I suggest, a necessary or indispensable element in the ecosystem for innovation or cultural production, but it's far from the only element. In our Global Innovation Index, for example, we measure some 80 components of the innovation ecosystem, of which intellectual property is one. Now, in seeking to benefit from intellectual property, I think there are many challenges for developing countries, and let me, if I may, cite four of them, just four of them, and they're fairly obvious ones. First of all, I believe that innovation and cultural production are to some extent a surplus activity, and so there's always a question of competing priorities. There are many urgent priorities for developing countries. So it has to fit into this sphere of competition for available resources. Secondly, innovation capacity and creative or cultural production capacity, the commercial capacity for innovation or creative production, is very much a long-term game. those countries who have had spectacular success in this regard, in building world-class competitive innovation capacity or creative economy capacity, have done so over a period of 30 or 40 years. It's not something that happens overnight, and that's a big challenge, of course, for policymakers in keeping a focus on something which has such a long-term strategy associated with it. Thirdly, I think we face a great challenge, or developing countries face a great challenge, with the speed of change of technology, and this occurring in a globalized world. So we see, of course, and it's apparent to all of us, generations of technology and new generations of technology. But those new generations of technology are coming upon us in a globalized context, so their impact is global. And let me cite just two examples, if I may. First of all, advanced manufacturing, which is a composite of a number of different technologies ranging from robotics to sensors to additive printing to artificial intelligence. But the advent of advanced manufacturing, which really replaces low-cost labour, is going to have naturally an impact on global value chains and the situation of developing countries in global value chains. So it's not like there is a technology that is brought on that has its impact purely locally. In a globalized world, it has an impact right across the world. Another example would be from the field of creative or cultural production, where we have seen across the last 20 to 30 years a revolution really in the technology of the production and distribution of creative works. And that, of course, is occurring in away from the physical product and towards virtual distribution. And that is, again, is occurring in a globalized context. And the more connectivity there is, the more these new platforms are going to influence local models, business models for creative and cultural production. And then lastly, of course, it's a competitive world, but it's a competitive world in which there's a great disparity of available resources to devote to this question of innovation or cultural production and the role of intellectual property in relation to each. As far as we are concerned, as an organisation, as you all know well, our approach has been to offer a menu of services, which, if I may say, I think is now quite a rich menu of services, to address each of the components of or each of the ways in which intellectual property contributes to the innovation ecosystem or the creative production ecosystem. So it covers legal and institutional, legal and institutional framework. It covers technical infrastructure, so with our programs for office automation, WIPO Connect in the field of creative industries, our technology and innovation support centres, our global databases. It covers through the Academy our human capacity building programs. It covers the knowledge products that are built upon the data that is collected from our global systems and from the member states' intellectual property systems. It covers public-private partnerships such as WIPO Research or the Accessible Books Consortium. It covers an appropriate technology program built on the basis of solutions that can be found in patent information and off-patent technology. And all of this needs to be put into the context of a strategy or a plan for each country to use all of these various elements to address their own circumstances and to see, therefore, how they can benefit, actually, from intellectual property. So I think one of the great contributions that the Development Agenda has made to this organisation and the Committee on Development and Intellectual Property has been the mainstreaming of development. From what I have just mentioned, you will see that there is not one part of the organisation that does not address the development dimension in the delivery of its services. That is, I think, a major achievement. So we have a very long and rich day before us. I wish you much success in your deliberations today, and thank you for this opportunity to say a few words at the outset.